Thank you so much. I think we could start our recording now. And I would like to just say to you good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and to warmly welcome all the participants to today's online session on the topic of mercury material flow, supply, demand, and trade. My name is Monika Stankiewicz, and I'm Executive Secretary of the Minamata Convention. So I'm very happy to welcome you to this session. And before we start, I would like to remind also for the record that this session is being recorded and the recording will be made available on the Minamata Convention website. This session is part of the Minamata Online, the series of weekly digital events initiated by the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention on Mercury, focusing on three main streams. The first one is on implementation support and review to assist parties with information on the requirements of the convention and ongoing activities. The second stream is about preparation for the fourth meeting of the Conference of the Parties, which will be held on 1st to 5th November next year in Bali, Indonesia. And the third stream of the Minamata Online is on mercury and science. And this is to provide opportunities to review and exchange on the latest scientific results and developments that may be of use to the implementation of the convention. And this session on mercury material flow is the first event under the mercury and science stream. As you know, the history of the Minamata Convention started with shared scientific knowledge on the global nature of mercury pollution, and science will continue to be instrumental to ensure effective and cost-efficient implementation of the convention by parties. And it is not only natural science that can benefit our work, but also science from other and across different disciplines. And for example, the Mercury and Science strand of the Minamata Online will finish this year with a session to explore socioeconomic impact of mercury pollution. The Minamata Online is very much a collaborative effort. I'm very grateful to our partners who have agreed to join us for this year's season of the Minamata Online initiative, the Global Mercury Partnership, Geneva Environment Network, and the International Conference on Mercury as the Global Pollutant. As you also may know, the next edition of the International Conference on Mercury as a Global Pollutant will be held in 2022 in Cape Town. And I hope that its co-chair, Dr. Joy Lehner, will be able to join us to make introductory remarks. So please, colleagues, let me know if we will have Dr. Lehner on board. And I would also, of course, like to warmly welcome and introduce our panelists today. We have my colleague Eisaku Toda from the Minamata Convention Secretariat, who will be also moderating the session. I would like to welcome Ken Davis from UNEP, Peter Maxson from Concorde East-West SPRL, Barbara Hendus from the IUCN National Committee from Netherlands, and Thomas Groeneveld from the US Environmental Protection Agency, and Okechukwu Jonathan Okonkwo from the Tshwane University of Technology to end the list. I would hand over now to Joy Lehner if Dr. Lehner is on board with us. If not, I would then hand over to Eisaku. I would just like to mention that we have been very delighted to receive invitation to be engaged in the preparation of the conference, which will be held in 2022 in Cape Town, and I'm absolutely sure that the conference will provide plenty of opportunities to advance collaboration with regard to mercury science and on the local, regional, national, and global level. So this is very much appreciated cooperation we have with the conference, but I will stop here and I will then hand over to you, Eisaku, and thank you so much. Have a good session. Thank you.
Thank you, Monika. And it seems that Joy has not joined yet, so I think we will wait. We will give her floor when she arrives. So as suggested, I would like to to my opening remarks or to introduction to the discussion. And I'd like to ask to go to the next slide. So, well, this is the first session of the Minamata Science, Mercury Science stream of the Minamata Online. And we chose the issue of mercury flow as a topic for this first session. The background is that the effectiveness evaluation under Article 22 of the Convention is one of the areas where science can contribute to the implementation of the Convention. As you see in the highlighted text on the Article 22, the Conference of the Parties is to periodically evaluate the effectiveness of the Convention on the basis of available scientific and other information. COP3 last year requested the Secretariat to work on a number of reports for the first effectiveness evaluation. I do not reproduce the Annex 2 mentioned in the highlighted text, but it includes mercury trade, supply, and demand report, including mercury waste flows and stocks. Next slide, please. This slide is from one of the existing reports on mercury trade, supply, and demand, which is UNEP 2017 report. Ken and Peter will speak on this report in more detail. And this overall summary chart nicely visualizes the global flow of mercury, focusing on the intentional use of mercury. This estimation is based on the governmental, industrial, and other statistics of economic and other activities involving the supply and use of mercury. Next slide, please. I would also like to mention the reporting requirement of the Minamata Convention. Official reporting from governments may contribute to a more complete picture of supply, demand, and trade of mercury. Article 21 of the Convention requests the parties to report on the implementation of control measures, including Article 3 on supply and trade. As highlighted on this slide, total amount of primary mercury mining, results of parties' effort to identify supply sources, and information on import consent are included in the report submitted by the end of last year, which is highlighted yellow. And we are currently putting together the submissions. Submissions of other information not highlighted yellow is for the full report due by the end of 2021. Next slide, please. The analysis that I mentioned focus on intentional use of mercury, but we find scientific literature to analyze material flow of mercury, also covering impurities and or unintentional releases to the environment, waste flows, and so on. This is a list of literature compiled by a consultant, Kishore Parajuli, to review the currently available literature on the mercury material flow. We would welcome any information on other studies that would contribute to our work to understand the mercury flow in society and the environment. Next slide is the Kishore's summary or overview of the existing inventories, and there are he looked at some commonalities and differences, and for 4 points for differing approaches were identified: inventory versus material flow analysis, differing system boundaries, varying sources of data used, and the differences of estimation approaches. But I'm not going into too much details, but I would like to note that the experts on the mercury flow in Japan and China are invited to the next session on 15th of October. Next slide, please. And also I'd like to mention the trade aspect, and the mercury flow understood from the trade statistics will be presented by Peter. And also we like to note that there are studies on the informal or illicit or illegal trade. And we invited Barbara to present the IUCN study, which is mentioned in this slide. So my last slide is, please, next slide. My last slide is about the plan for the Minamata online session. The first 3 sessions under the Mercury Science relates to the mercury flow. Today it is supply, demand, and trade. On 15th of October, it is about waste. And on the 5th of November, we are going to look at emissions and releases, both estimation and projection. And that 4th and 5th sessions are not included in this slide, but these will cover the multimedia modeling and the socio-economic implications. I would also like to note that there will be season 2 next year with more scientific topics. And also I'd like to note that next week there will be a session on Article 3 trade under the implementation review and support stream. And this is my introduction. And now I see Joy has joined. So perhaps I like, before going turning to Ken Davis, I'd like to invite Dr. Joy Lina to provide an opening remark. Joy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Monica Sankowitz, and good afternoon, Eisaku Toda, and our distinguished presenters today, and the panelists, and then also the guests from all over the world. My apologies sincerest for joining late. I had a bit of trouble getting in. I think with all of this happening in the world, we're starting to learn how to use different virtual platforms. And this is certainly also my first virtual platform where I'm using WebEx. So greetings to everyone from all over the world to the session. Today, I'm really honored to represent the International Conference on Mercury as a Global Pollutant for 2022, the conference that will be held in Cape Town, as the co-chairperson and then also as the lead coordinator for the workshops of the conference. And so when Eisaku approached us to join hands with UNEP on the Minamata online season 1, we were really very excited and very happy to assist. We've had a couple of meetings with Eisaku, and today we are here with season 1 of the 2020. So Eisaku has really done an amazing job to get everybody on board. And so we basically, in terms of this virtual platform, I think it's an excellent approach in terms of what UNEP is doing, in terms of basically taking this forward and with the Minamata Convention and bringing all of us as authorities, as the government, as scientists, as NGOs, and all interested and affected parties together on this platform. And this season, there's a lot that's going to be learned through the season. And we also at the conference, as the local organizing committee in Cape Town, we see this as an opportunity for us to link our workshops that we will host in 2022 in Cape Town. We see this as an opportunity to link these workshops with those workshops. So it's sort of a run up to the workshops that will be held in Cape Town. And so definitely in terms of this virtual platform now and then face-to-face in 2022 in the beautiful Cape Town in South Africa. And we really extend you the invitation to you to join us in 2022. It's only just about a year and a half away. And so I think with these sessions that Eisaku and UNEP have arranged, it's really, really excellent in terms of preparing us for the conference in 2022 for the workshops that we will host. And so we've already also put the link onto the website. So if you just Google If you Google International Conference on Mercury as a Global Pollutant 2022, you will certainly come to the webpage and you will see the links there as well. And we're really excited to partner with Eisaku, and we see this as a long-standing relationship that is basically come to fruition now, and it will also continue in the future. So thank you very much from our side, Eisaku. We certainly honored to be part of this first session that you have developed, and we will continue to be there with you with the next seasons that you are planning. So thank you very much, everyone, and all of the best to the panelists and the presenters today. Thanks. Over to you, Eisaku.
Thank you, Joy, for your very, very kind words, and it is utmost pleasure to work with you. Indeed, it is what we wished for a long time to strengthen the liaison with the scientific community. So this, I hope that this will be a good and accelerator of such cooperation. So having said this, I would like to turn. Thank you. And then we would like to proceed to the introduction. We are still in the introductory part, and I'm inviting Mr. Ken Davis, who is handling mercury issues in the Chemicals and Health branch of UNEP. Ken, the floor is yours. And I think the yes, this is the one. Okay.
Thank you very much, Eisaku, and I want to extend my welcome to all the participants on behalf of UNEP's Chemicals and Health branch, and also on behalf of the Global Mercury Partnership, which is a multi-sectoral voluntary partnership that helps to implement the Minamata Convention and take action on mercury pollution. And I'd like to thank the Minamata Secretariat for the opportunity to be part of this this session of Minamata Online. So I just want to take a few minutes to kind of set some historical context, I guess, for the information that we'll be hearing from the presenters. There was wise person who said that those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. So let's take a look at the history of mercury supply and demand. Researchers have attempted to reconstruct the mercury use and, in fact, mercury releases going back for other reasons, in that it's useful for understanding the transport and fate of mercury, and also for testing models. But one quite complete time series that I want to show you here is on the screen. You can take a look at the slide on your screen. And it's from a paper from Hannah Horwitz and others who reconstructed mercury consumption, estimated mercury consumption, all the way back to the 1850s. And so this shows us how mercury consumption has changed, both as a whole and throughout the different categories. They've estimated consumption from 14 different categories. And if you look at this chart here, you can see 3 distinct peaks. And the first one is in 1890, then there's a peak in about 1940, and there's another peak in mercury consumption where it gets up to almost 10,000 tons per year in about 1970. So looking at the reasons for each of these peaks is illustrative. In 1890, as you can see, the vast majority of mercury use was from mining silver and gold, and this is from using mercury in amalgamation. And this big peak happens as a result of the gold rushes occurring in the Americas at that time, especially those gold rushes in the Western US and the Western Canada. Western Canada, the California, British Columbia, Alaska gold rushes. And a tremendous amount of mercury was released into the environment, was used and released into the environment in those areas from amalgamation. Then in about 1940, there's another peak. And this is a bit more enigmatic, but the authors of the paper attribute this to producing chemicals and explosives that were produced in the lead up to and during World War II. So this This is attributed to World War II, Second World War, this second peak. And then the biggest peak in about 1970 is a result of mercury use in a number of intentional use categories, the chlor-alkali sector, paints, mercury containing batteries and other products. And after about 1970, mercury use declines for a few decades. And this is because of environmental regulations and also the availability of substitutes. And then as we approach our current time, this goes till 2010, we can see that today the mercury supply is, or mercury consumption rather, is dominated by artisanal small-scale gold mining, VCM, vinyl chloride monomer production, and then an array of mercury-added products. So we'll take a look at the next slide, which is from the same paper, and it looks at mercury supply. It's a much simpler graphic, and this simply shows mercury supply. So the absolute amounts and the peaks, the time series peaks are the same because the authors constrain consumption on total mercury supply. But what we can see here is an interesting trend where mercury supply was almost all from primary mine mercury, just up until about 1980, when secondary mercury grew as a supply source. And secondary mercury, this is mercury from recycled products or recovered from natural gas processing or non-ferrous metals production. And now secondary mercury production is in fact greater than primary mine production, or at least we think it is. It's a bit hard to constrain some of the primary mine production, as we'll hear in just a bit. And one more slide, please. So that was the historical context, and coming into our modern era, I just want to mention two publications from UNEP. The first one is the Summary of Supply, Trade, and Demand Information, which was published in 2006, and this was the first global summary of its type, and a lot of the information here contributed to helped with the negotiations of what would become the Minamata Convention. And this summary was updated and republished. Was basically updated completely in 2017 as the Global Mercury Supply, Trade, and Demand Report. This was done with funding from the US EPA, as well as the government of Germany, and in collaboration with the Global Mercury Partnership. So I want to thank those partners. And this report is, we also are very fortunate to have Peter Maxson, who's presenting next, I believe, who was the lead technical author of this report. And so Peter will hit some of the highlights of this 2017 Global Mercury Supply, Trade, and Demand Report. So that's all for my introduction. Again, thank you very much to Eisaku and to the Minamata team, and to Monica for making this possible. And I'll turn it back over to you, Eisaku, to introduce the presenters.
Thank you, Ken. And so, I'm very pleased that Jonathan was able to join. So welcome, Jonathan. And I'm not going to introduce the panelists now. I think I will introduce the speakers when they start speaking, and then we will go to the panel discussion. And I saw some interesting message in the chat box, which was in fact the private message to me, which asked what is the objective of this session. And as Monica said, and as I said, this is an opportunity for enhancing the science policy interface. And the Secretariat itself is one of the audience. We would like to learn from science. And I think many of you from the government's policymaking side would like to, I think you would like to learn from science. And if you're from scientific community, I think you would like to learn the needs of the policymakers. So this is to provide the opportunity for science policy interface, including for Secretariat's benefit. Thank you for the question. It is very interesting. So I'd like to And also, I'd like to remind the participants that there's a Q&A box, and you can put your questions in the box, and the panelists can see the box, so they may be able to look at the questions and respond while in their presentation or in the panel discussion. We are not sure whether there's we have time for questions from the floor at the end. We will try to do that, but I cannot promise. Having said this, I'd like to go to the presentations, and I see that we have spent a bit more time than planned in the opening session, and it may not be fair to ask presenters to limit to 10 minutes, but I think we will need to. So to have enough time for discussion. So now I'd like to introduce Peter Maxson, who for the last 25 years used his education in engineering and economics to work for UNEP, European Commission, the US EPA, NGOs, and others to analyze to promote virtually all aspects of better mercury management. Peter, you have the floor. You're muted, Peter.
I'm okay now?
Yes, you're okay.
Okay.
And can you speak a bit more closely to the microphone?
Yes, is that better?
Slightly better, yes.
How about now?
Yes,
okay.
Very good.
Okay, sorry. Thanks very much, Eisaku. I'm pleased to join this group of distinguished panelists today, and I hope there's as much interest in the further sessions organized by UNEP and ICMGP as there seems to be in this one. It's quite a valuable initiative, I think, between the COP meetings. I will speak today. We can go already to the next slide about the specifically about the 2017 report, with also some updates about what is happening globally with supply, demand, and trade of mercury. By supply, we're talking specifically about elemental mercury sources. Demand refers to uses, and the trade, at least for this presentation, will refer mostly to documented trade because we will have a separate presentation on informal and illicit trade. So the next slide, please. I'm going a bit quickly to make sure I comply with Eisaku's limit for 10 minutes, so I'll do my best. The mercury supply is coming from 5 key sources, categories. And comes to, at least in 2015, was estimated at around 4,100 tons worldwide, within a rather broad range, because in most of these cases it's rather difficult to have a precise estimate of the amount of supply from each source. The next slide. One of the main sources is mining. We managed to arrange for the large mine in Spain to be closed in 2003. Other mining was coming from China, Kyrgyzstan, and a few other places. But what we realized, because the demand for mercury stayed relatively high, some new mercury mining started to appear in Mexico and Indonesia. And I'll mention a little bit more about this in another slide, but the quantities coming from both countries remain rather uncertain. In terms of byproduct mercury, this is coming mostly from the smelting of non-ferrous ores. For the chlor-alkali category, as chlor-alkali facilities are gradually closing in most parts of the world, they're releasing the amount of mercury that was used as part of the process. That was a major source of mercury coming from the US and Europe for a certain period of time, and now it's continuing to come from some other countries. Recycling of mercury added products and mercury waste continues to be a relatively large source of mercury, and the trends are not entirely clear since we haven't studied what's happening in the more recent years. Next slide, please. Just a quick picture of a rudimentary smelting process in Jakarta, where they happen to have in another part of Indonesia a very, very high grade cinnabar that lends itself to this type of smelting. The next slide, please. In terms of demand for mercury, our estimate with all the data that we could gather ranged around 4,700 tons. And the main categories of demand, the well-known ASGM demand, and also for vinyl chloride monomer production. In the chlor-alkali industry, lamps, dental uses, measuring devices, switches and relays. These are relatively familiar categories. I just wanted to say briefly the difference between the measured supply or the calculated supply and the calculated demand was about 600 tons. We assumed for the 2017 report, based upon what information we could gather, that most of that excess was from a drawdown of stocks already held in Singapore and some other bonded warehouses. Although it's possible that we underestimated the amount of primary mercury that was going on. So we hope to try to get a bit better precision on these numbers when we update these estimates. Next slide, please. In terms of the division of global mercury uses, this chart shows more or less the percentages of the different uses. And if we go to the next slide, we can also see there some of the range of estimates around the different and the evolution of some of these uses from 2005 to 2015. You can see that the largest uncertainty is around the use in ASGM, which is not surprising, of course, since it's such a difficult area to find precision with. Next slide, please. Mercury use in products. I won't dwell on this slide specifically, but it has a fair amount of detail about the different categories of products and uses in different parts of the world. The next slide, please. Likewise, with regard to mercury use in ASGM, the main regions using mercury for this purpose are South America, East and Southeast Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. Coming back to this slide briefly, it just shows an overview of the supply on the left side and demand on the right side, divided into major categories. I think the value here is showing how much mercury is coming back through recovery and recycling at the bottom of the figure. And based upon the best estimates that we could do, where the mercury is ending up, either accumulation in society, certainly a certain amount going to the environment, and the long-term storage and disposal at the right side of the figure. The next slide gets briefly into mercury trade. We have seen a reduction in global trade volumes between 2010 and 2015, both in terms of global exports and global imports. Likewise, we've seen a major shift in the trading hubs. However, as the reported volumes of imports and exports decrease, we have also seen more indications of informal or illicit transfers. And Barbara will certainly speak about that in more detail. Next slide, please. In terms of the exports or mining that we've seen more recently from Indonesia and Mexico, we also see declines in the amount of recorded mining, but there are suspicions that the unreported exports from Indonesia and Mexico continue in various ways. And we're trying to get a better handle on that as well. Next slide, please. In terms of mercury traded worldwide, this is a development of the Comtrade data as put together by Chatham House. The main takeaway, I think, from this is that after relatively stable trading volumes through about 2011 or 12, there has been a significant global decline since then. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to show two slides, one for 2005, another for 2015, showing the major global differences in, you can see the locus of trade around Europe and also to some extent around the United States in 2005, whereas on the next slide for 2017, we can see that the United States and Europe, because of the export bans, have almost entirely stopped trading. And we show now, or more recently, the exports of mercury from Mexico to Bolivia on the left side of the slide, and the significant imports into the United Arab Emirates, into India, into Hong Kong, and to some extent still into Singapore. It's also useful to note in this regard that many of these trade flows are similar to the trade flows of gold between different locations. And this comes up again when we look at informal trade flows. The other takeaway from this is that if you look at the import of mercury into Bolivia in South America, Bolivia is clearly not providing mercury for all the ASGM in South America. So there's lots of other things going on there that aren't evident from this image. And likewise for Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa, there is much more gold mining than is evident from the mercury trade in this image. Next slide, please. So to finish, just a couple of issues about the mercury trade. There is some uncertain quality with some of the data reported to Comtrade, limited transparency of some of the data, the two-tier mercury price because of the export bans in some countries as opposed to free trade in other countries. And in the last slide, as I mentioned, we need to keep looking at the places where mercury continues to be mined. That would include China as well in this case. The increasing volume of illicit and informal mercury that I mentioned previously. And also, as I mentioned, the trade flows of gold as well as mercury along some of the same paths. And the free trade zones, which store mercury frequently, but which are relatively untransparent in many cases. Once the mercury goes in, it's not always easy to see where it's coming out and where it's going. So I appreciate the attention, and the last slide just has some contact information for me personally if anybody's interested. Thank you, Eisaku.
Thank you, Peter, for almost limiting you to except to 10 minutes. And then I'd like to turn to the next speaker, Barbara Hendus, who works in IUCN National Committee of the Netherlands, who is going to present on their recent report on mercury trade. So I give the floor to Barbara.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak here today. As mentioned, I will talk a little bit more about the informal trade of mercury, especially related to the artisanal and small-scale gold mining sector. Next slide, please. As we have already heard from Peter, Basically, the ASGM sector is one of the largest emitters of anthropogenic mercury emissions, with up to 37% of all the anthropogenic mercury emissions. And that's also why it is so important to look into the trade for ASGM. And one of the questions that we asked ourselves, of course, is with so many projects that exist already that try to introduce more and more mercury-free mining techniques, and also, for example, the Minamata Convention that specifically regulates international trade, but also has a focus on usage of mercury in ASGM, in which it obliges ratifying parties to reduce and, if possible, eliminate the use of mercury in gold mining. Why there is still so much mercury used in artisanal small-scale gold mining. And next slide, please. Thank you. When we first started looking into the matter and we looked at the official trade, we very quickly came across a lot of problems that Peter also talked about, of course. So there are discrepancies in importing and exporting data from different countries. But also if you look at some of the amounts that get imported into countries with a large ASGM sector, you can tell that these do not match up with on-the-ground mining realities. And of course, there are these large uncertainties of how much mercury is actually used in small-scale mining, which is due to the fact that a lot of the ASGM sector is informal, and therefore even getting data about the sector and about the gold production is really difficult. So that's one of the reasons why we decided to look into more detail. Next slide, please. And investigate both the formal, but also especially the informal trade for ASGM in different countries. We selected these 8 countries on 3 different continents. And next slide, please. And our main key objectives were to understand the flows, both internationally and domestically, and also to identify trade hubs, supply chains, key players, and the main drivers of mercury trade in ASGM. And our goal is to enhance the governance of mercury in ASGM with that knowledge, and to also showcase that it's really not just happening here and there, but that it's a global issue that has very similar patterns across the globe. Next slide, please. And for time reasons, of course, I cannot go into all the details from all the countries, so I selected a few examples. And the first one is from East Africa. When our partners started to investigate the mercury trade there, they very quickly realized that the whole region is very connected, so it doesn't make much sense to look only into the countries independently, but also to look at a more regional level. And each of these 3 countries, Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya, has formal mercury imports, which are mainly for industrial use. And from these 3 countries, Kenya imports the largest amounts, which are a multitude of the amounts that Uganda and Tanzania import. And when you just look realistically, then there is no way that all of this mercury can be imported for industrial use. So our partners have been informed and have found out that a lot of this mercury gets informally diverted to the use in ASGM, both within Kenya and in Uganda and Tanzania. The cross-border trade of this informal trade is very common and very easy, as you can see on the image. The flows depend a bit on the supply, demand, and the price. The main flows you can see in orange. However, depending on the situation and the demand in the time period, you can also have trade that goes the exact opposite direction, which you can see in green. This goes to an extent where really traders pass each other at the borders. And also, our partners found out a lot of information about how this trade really happens in detail. So especially on the very porous borders that we can see in some of these areas, we have informants that are based on the different crossing areas, and they can tell the transporters that there might be some custom checks. So these can avoid these areas. We also heard stories that disabled people are used to transport mercury across the borders because they're checked less often. And if you look higher in the supply chain, the whole structure gets really cartel-like, similar to when we look into drug trade. It operates on secrecy and it's based on trust. So for somebody new to enter the market, it's really difficult and even dangerous. And that, of course, also makes looking into the trade very complicated. The mercury trade is very lucrative, especially high up in the supply chain, so for importers and for wholesalers. And a lot of these actors double up as gold traders. So we often have, as Peter mentioned, the same routes that are being used, but also the same people are involved in both trades. Next slide, please. The second example I would like to talk about is the Philippines. The Philippines had very little formal mercury imports in the last few years, ranging from a few hundred kilograms in 2016 to only 35 in 2018. However, the Philippines has a very huge informal ASGM sector, and actually a lot of the gold produced is supposed to leave the country informally as well. So again, we have huge problems with estimates and actually figuring out hard data on both ASGM and mercury use in this country. On the slide, you can see the supply chain here. And we have mercury arriving, of course, formally, what I just mentioned, through formal ports. And we also have the same entry point for informal mercury, which arrives mainly through container ships from China. It passes customs either through bribery or custom officials also often just don't really know what to look for. The second entry point of mercury is informal ports, which are ports that are used also to smuggle other illegal goods, mainly from Indonesia and Malaysia. And the actors that are involved are often using smaller fishing boats to transport the mercury. Mercury from that goes to mercury wholesalers, often hardware stores, for example, in the larger cities. And then it gets sold to more local traders, which again often are people that deal with both mercury and gold. And these people then further sell the mercury to the miners. And what we heard a lot from the Philippines is that the miners actually don't really often have a choice, and that they need to keep using mercury because the only gold dealer in the area, for example, who is also a mercury trader, makes them keep buying mercury. So sometimes the mercury gets also handed to the miners for free in advance. And then later on, the same trader buys the gold for a reduced price from them. Another source of mercury in the Philippines is confiscated mercury. The amounts are, of course, a lot smaller than what is imported. But we've been reported that confiscated mercury reappears on the markets as well as recycled mercury. Next slide, please. To just give kind of a bit of an overview of what we found across the regions, is that we have a lot of factors that hinder our understanding of the informal trade, of course. So it starts with that there's very little data on ASGM itself due to the informality of the sector, that we have large discrepancies in reporting of formal mercury trade, as we have heard, and of course, with increasing regulations on formal mercury trade, more and more of the trade moves into the black markets, where we have then really cartel-like structures in place that make investigations quite difficult. Factors that contribute to the use of mercury are also very important here to look at. So first of all, I've put tradition. What I mean with this is that mercury has been around for a really long time in gold mining. A lot of the miners grew up with it. They even played with it, having it in their bare hands as children. So even if they know that it's really poisonous, it's hard for them to actually change things as it's just been around for so long. A second reason is the poverty that's related to ASGM. A lot of the miners need or they use mercury because it's a very fast technique to get gold to feed their families on a daily basis. And also a lot of the mercury-free techniques, they involve an initial investment, which most of the miners just cannot afford. And in addition to that, we of course have these market and supply chain factors, which I mentioned, especially the gold-mercury link here. So basically, because the trade is so lucrative for the people higher up in the supply chain, they want to keep it going. And because they often double up as gold and mercury traders, they increase their profits and keep the miners kind of on the hook to keep using mercury. So the bottom line is that even though the miners are the end users of the mercury, they are not the driving force behind the trade, but the actors higher in the supply chain that make the most money keep the trade going. And in addition to that, we of course have different governance issues in the different countries that complicate our understanding of the trade. Next slide, please. So to come a little bit to the question of how to tackle this problem, there's unfortunately not an easy solution or an easy fix here. We really need a holistic approach that looks at the ASGM sector and at the mercury trade, of course. It would be a start to formalize the ASGM sector further to increase support for miners, both financially and also from the government, to have more access to mercury-free techniques, that it's easier for them to also stop these dependencies with some of the gold and mercury traders, for example. Of course, looking at illegal trade, we need more enforcement and border strengthening, and also just more training for custom officials, because often they look for drugs or they look for weapons, but they're not trained to actually recognize mercury. Concerning official trade, we need also clearer laws and regulations, because in some of the countries, laws are quite ambiguous. And then to avoid the diversion of mercury that was already imported, it's really important to have clear licensing and monitoring schemes for domestic mercury trade. Then there are a lot of other issues, for example, that mercury gets re-enters the market after being confiscated. So we should also further look into really creating sound interim storage facilities. And of course, what we have seen in a lot of the regions is that if one country increases regulations on formal mercury trade, then a neighboring country just becomes the regional hub for mercury trade. So we need really cooperation, not just nationally, but regionally and internationally. And we also think it's very important to create a market for mercury-free gold to help miners really be aware that there is also an economic benefit for them if they can stop using mercury. And of course, not to mention, I don't want to say that we should stop any project related to mercury-free technologies. We should keep going with them in addition to all the other factors that I mentioned. And these technologies should have then an institutionalized long-term support by projects, but also by the government, so that the miners actually have the opportunity to keep using these techniques, and that it makes sense for them to use them because they know there is a market available. Next slide, please. And with that, I basically just want to bring your attention to our report that was published this year. It's now available in English, Spanish, and French. And also on the same link that you can find in the bottom, you can find the different regional or country reports that go into even more depth for the area. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Barbara, and I look forward to the more in-depth discussion during the panel discussion. And then now we are turning to the national inventories, and the first one is from US, and today we are going to have presentation in the US and in South Africa, and in 2 weeks we're going to have speakers on Japan, China, Russia, and Latin American countries. So the first one is from Tom Groeneveld of US EPA, who assists in coordinating the Global Mercury Partnership products area. So he's a specialist in mercury-added products since 2007, and he's directly involved in the TSCA inventory of US. Tom, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Eisaku. And good morning, good evening, and good day to everybody. Today I'm going to provide an overview of the reporting requirements for the mercury inventory of the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA as we call it, and the 2020 inventory of mercury supply, use, and trade in the United States. I wanted to mention up front that I'll focus on the content of the 2020 inventory, but would like to provide comprehensive background information on the reporting rule and how we designed it, and how that generates data for the inventory. So the background information is in the current slide deck, but I'll mostly mention brief highlights of the background during And as you'll see in the upcoming slides, the inventory report and other materials such as frequently asked questions are available on the EPA's webpage for Mercury. Next slide. I intend to cover three major themes: a summary of the statutory authority and agency interpretations that shape the reporting requirements, which we refer to as the Mercury Inventory Reporting Rule, a walkthrough of what is required to be reported, the who, what, how, and when it is necessary to report, and as a co-lead of the UNEP Mercury and Products Partnership, an overview of compiled information related to mercury-added products, especially those in Article 4, Annexes A and B of the Minamata Convention. And I would note that the 2020 inventory covers more than products and would welcome additional discussion on such topics in the future. Next slide, please. So the Mercury inventory was established in 2016 among many amendments to TSCA and the Frank R. Lautenberg Chemical Safety for the 21st Century Act. We also refer to that as the Lautenberg Amendments. And EPA is told that it must publish an inventory of mercury supply, use, and trade in the United States every 3 years. And by statute, mercury is defined both as elemental mercury and a mercury compound. The agency is also directed to identify manufacturing processes and products where mercury is intentionally added, and to recommend actions, including regulatory and voluntary approaches to reduce the use of mercury. And as I've mentioned, to make all this happen, Congress authorized EPA to develop a nationwide mandatory information collection rule. Next slide, please. So EPA published its mercury inventory reporting rule on June 27th, 2018. And by statute, the reporting requirements apply to any person, but that actually means companies and whatnot, who manufactures, including imports mercury, who manufactures, including imports mercury-added products, or who otherwise intentionally uses mercury in a manufacturing process. And because the structure of the statutory text that called for the creation of the inventory, the agency was also required to publish an initial inventory report in March of 2017, which, as we've discussed, predated the actual reporting requirements established in the 2018 rule. So I wanted to note here that the 2017 inventory report relied on existing publicly available data and made note of gaps that were to be filled ultimately by the reporting rule requirements. Next slide. So just a few more information on what needs to be reported. As a first step, the agency was required to interpret what these terms supply, use, and trade meant in the context of TSCA, as well as other kinds of mercury use activities that go on every day. And after much thought, the agency determined that supply would mean manufactured or stored mercury, and that use would refer to the use of mercury in manufacturing mercury-added products or other manufacturing processes, and that trade would mean import, export, or distribution and commerce, which is a fancy TSCA way of saying selling and transporting and warehousing mercury or mercury-added products. Excuse me. So based on those interpretations, the data required to be reported include the amount of mercury produced, imported, stored, used, sold, or exported, no matter how small the amount. There's no de minimis reporting requirement, even if we're talking about parts per million. The types of mercury-added products that are made, the types of the types of manufacturing processes and how mercury is used in those processes, the business sectors to which mercury or mercury-added products are sold, the country of imported mercury or mercury-added products, and the destination country for exported mercury-added products. Next slide, please. So this slide has a lot of data on it. What I'll communicate to everyone here today is that there are exceptions to the reporting requirements, and I wanted to highlight a few of those. So the EPA U.S. inventory does not collect information from persons who do not first manufacture or import products. So if you're merely a seller or retailer or distributing facility, those types of persons are not reporting to the inventory. Also, if you generate, handle, or store mercury-containing waste, you are specifically exempted by statute from the national inventory unless those persons recover, which we would consider to be the manufacturer of mercury during those processes. And also, I would just note that if during the manufacturing process, mercury or mercury compounds are generated as an impurity, those persons also are exempted from reporting. So turning to the actual inventory, as I mentioned, the most recent inventory was published in March 30th, 2020. And this 2020 report is the first report in which the supply, use, and trade of mercury is presented based on data collected under our reporting rule. Persons who were required to report were submitted information directly to EPA via the online mercury electronic reporting application we designed. An online reporting application, which we hope made things a lot simpler for persons needing to report. And it was organized as basically a fill in the blanks form with drop-down menus and lists and other sorts of checkbox items to make things as easy as possible for people to report. The deadline for reporting information to EPA was July 1st, 2019. Reporting activities that occurred in the calendar year for 2018. And the inventory collection and reporting cycle will continue every 3 years thereafter to inform future inventories. As I mentioned, given the divergent types of information that were used to form the initial 2017 initial inventory, a lot of publicly available information, and now the mandatory, very tailored and very specific information that we requested for the 2020 inventory, we are not attempting at this time to draw any comparisons between the two reports. However, we do expect to be able to provide such comparisons no later than the 2023 inventory report. Next slide, please. So this slide shows basically one of the more overarching summary tables in the report. And as I mentioned, I'm going to be focusing on totals related to products. So in 2018, the mercury and mercury-added products made in the United States was nearly 22,000 pounds, or 10 metric tons. Excuse me. And the combined total for mercury-added products sold in the United States was just under 9,000 pounds, or 4.1 metric tons. And the combined total for mercury and imported mercury-added products was just over 3,000 pounds, or 1.4 metric tons. And the combined total for exported mercury-added products was nearly 6,000 pounds, or 2.7 metric tons. Next slide, please. This slide breaks out the amount in specific product categories for products made in the United States via the addition of elemental mercury. And as you can see, the two largest categories were for dental amalgam and for switches, relays, sensors, and valves, which used almost 9,300 and 9,000 pounds respectively, which translates to 4.2 and 4 metric tons. The remaining amount, some 1,600 pounds or 0.8 metric tons, was used in various lighting products and applications. Next slide, please. And this slide merely tries to provide a visual representation of those numbers. As you can see, more than 90% of the elemental mercury used to manufacture products in the United States was used in 2 product categories. Next slide, please. Excuse me, just as we covered elemental mercury before, this slide breaks out the amounts of mercury for specific product categories, where the addition of mercury compounds is what made these items mercury-added products. And the vast majority of mercury compounds, almost 1,800 pounds or 0.8 metric tons, are used to make various formulated products, including preservatives and vaccines, chemical reagents, and testing kits. And the remaining amount, which was just over 100 pounds, which is less than 0.1 metric tons, was used in silver zinc batteries and lighting products or applications. Next slide, please. Again, just a visual representation. And as I mentioned, again, similar to the elemental mercury slide, 90% of elemental mercury that uses mercury compounds is used in 2 similar related categories, and those are the formulated products. So the next slide, something that we did not have before, is the mercury inventory allowed us to show the countries of origin for mercury-added products imported into the United States. And The map is very tiny, but there are a total of 23 countries from which products were imported into the United States. And those numbers, recall that the amount of mercury imported in products in the United States was just over 3,000 pounds or 1.4 metric tons. I can speak, I know we're running short on time here. I can speak to more specifics about those types of products perhaps later on, but I will just leave it at the bulk import number for now. Next slide. Finally, this slide shows the countries of destination for mercury added products exported from the United States. And that total number was 82 countries. And as of before, recall that the total amount of mercury exported and mercury added products was nearly 6,000 pounds or 2.7 metric tons. So, aside from the numbers, when we are developing the mercury inventory, one thing we are required to do by law is to identify products and manufacturing processes via the analysis of accumulated agency resources and programs, as well as the review of other federal, state, and international materials, and now buttressed by additional information that is submitted directly to the EPA through the reporting requirements. We have actually identified additional uses of mercury. We struggle with whether to call these new products or unknown products, but this list of products on the slide are just items that, based on how people reported what they are, some of these are nomenclature used specifically by the reporters themselves. We have this list of products that we are currently looking into to better understand what these products are and what they do. And finally, as I mentioned, after identifying products and processes that intentionally add mercury, EPA is to make recommendations for actions to further reduce mercury use. So at the time being, we're going to carefully consider the reporting results that we have in hand now, as well as factors such as the quantities of use and availability of safer, cost-effective alternatives, and as appropriate, will not hesitate to recommend future legal or regulatory actions in accordance with the statute. And also, the EPA will continue to use this information to implement U.S. obligations under the Minamata Convention and to participate in the UNEP Global Mercury Partnership, both of which, as we know, are designed to reduce the use of adverse effects of mercury. On my next slide, I just have some information related to the mercury inventory, as well as other mercury information provided by EPA, and I welcome any questions you might have after my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tom. Next speaker is from South Africa, Professor Jonathan Okonkwo of Tshwane University of Technology in South Africa, and we invited him to speak to the mercury inventory in South Africa. And as you know, the developing countries and countries in economies in transitions, many of these countries are doing the Minamata initial assessment projects, and he was involved in the inventory both of mercury use and emission releases in South Africa. So I give the floor to Jonathan, please.
Thank you, Eisaku, and let me start by apologizing for getting into the meeting a bit later than others. And thanks for the opportunity. Yes, my topic for today is mercury inventory using the UNEP Toolkit Level 2, a case study of South Africa. This is actually a follow-up of the inventory that we did earlier on using the Toolkit Level 1. But as you know very well, that the Toolkit Level 1 is very much of approximation, desktop sort of study. But the South African government wanted to actually do an in-depth or more thorough study in order to assist them in rectifying the Minamata Convention. So the general objectives was of the exercise is to develop a mercury inventory for South Africa using UNEP Toolkit Level 2, as I said earlier on, in order to enable the country to ratify the Minamata Convention on mercury for relevant affected sectors and industries. Next slide, please. I'm sure that we're very confident with the UNEP Toolkit Level 2. So these were the basic 4 steps that we followed in order to assist us in the inventory. As you see, once you start getting to level 3, you're talking about now quantitative information instead of looking at sort of very desktop approximation or estimate. But having said that, there are some sectors that we, as you can see in the slide, that we also used estimates where we couldn't get enough information. And then step 4 then looks at the sort of nationwide to establish a full inventory and report results using the guidelines given as the standard format. Next slide, please. This is just to give you, a feel of in terms of what the general equation or the terms within the equation that we're used to do the calculation. Estimated mercury released to pathways. We're talking about pathways now, air, land, water, as well as waste. And then the 2 major parameters are the activity rate and the input factor. And you can see at the bottom there where you have the definitions of what the activity rate and the input factors are. Next slide, please. As I said, there was a question of looking at the various sectors in the country. You are aware of the fact that in South Africa, we still use coal as a source of energy. We do have some 1 or 2 nuclear plants that supply energy, but primarily coal is still very much in use in South Africa for generation of energy. You have some of the provinces that actually have quite the industry there is more of a coal. And as you can see, we have the estimates in terms of that coal generated in terms of the mercury content is 36,000. It's quite a lot. And we're talking about kilograms per annum. And then you have the various coke is used in terms of steel making and oil and gas. Incidentally, we still get the only mineral that is not present in South Africa is oil, but we do get oil from coal. So there's a government, it's a partnership between government and private sector that actually extracts oil from coal. And as a result of that, definitely you do have some mercury as waste, since mercury content in South African coal is quite a bit on the high side. And if you look at the bottom, the total mercury releases from this source, we're talking about the extraction energy sources, is more than about 30%, which is quite a lot compared to the ones that we are going to see in the next slides. Next, please. And then we look at the primary virgin metal production, and we look at the gold production without mercury. The system now that is being used in South Africa for gold production amongst the mining houses, they use the cyanide system. There's no, in terms of the big industry or the big boys in the gold extraction that uses mercury anymore. But having said that, some of the mining houses are beginning to re-mine the waste dumps that were dumped earlier on during the early days of gold extraction, and obviously those dumps they used mercury amalgam as part of the process then. So there's quite a bit of this that is being remined now, and they're extracting quite a number of quantity of gold there. But there's no formal gold processing company now that uses mercury in its production or extraction. They use now cyanide system or method. The major hiccup with respect to gold extraction is with the artisanal mining. And in South Africa now, they are still regarded as illegal, because what happens is that they go to closed or dysfunctional mines that are no longer in use, and they still extract quite a number of gold. When you look at it from the point of view of high unemployment, quite a number of these gold miners, artisanal gold miners, depend on this, and that's how they feed their family. I think Barbara touched on this earlier on, that yes, it's illegal in the country, but it is an area that quite a number of unemployed young men are getting into. And then you have these other, the zinc production and copper production. You get quite a bit of gold that are generated as a result of the waste from the processing. Next slide, please. And then just a continuation of primary metal production, again, lead and other non-ferrous extraction and processing, chrome and PGMs, aluminum production from bauxite, and production of other minerals and materials. Next slide, please. When we look at consumer products with intentional use of mercury, well, we still have some fraction of thermometers, electrical switches and relays and light sources and batteries that are still being used, and they have mercury in them. We found out that during this inventory that quite a number of hospitals now, the government has intensified the replacement of thermometers as well as the blood pressure measurements. And so if you go to quite a number of clinics as well as the government hospitals, these they use now the digital thermometers and blood pressure measurement tools. And we also found out that we did actually look at cosmetics as well. Incidentally, quite a number of these cosmetics are imported into South Africa, and quite a number of them contain mercury, and they come from some African countries and some from China, and it's just all over, coming from all over the world. And we found out that they contain quite a number of these mercury in them, and they are quite widely used, especially by ladies, and that is a bit of a concern at the moment, because of the fact that there's really not much control in terms of what gets into the country. With respect to batteries, the government is also working in terms of trying to replace quite a number of these mercury-containing batteries. Light sources, some years ago, the energy producing government company, Eskom, is called Eskom, embarked on the trading of mercury-containing lamps, and then they would give back very minute mercury-containing lamps in exchange. And then I think this project, we were able to actually exchange about up to 4 million light sources. But that project has since ceased. But it was an initiative that was put in place in order to address the issue of mercury-containing lamps. Next, please. Other intentional product process and waste and incineration. We have mercury amalgam is still very much used in South Africa for dental filling, because of the fact that the new dental filling, people still feel that it doesn't last long, as a result of that, they still opt out to use the dental, amalgam for dental filling. And even the practitioners, dentists that were from the older school still prefer to use this because according to them, their customers actually tend to go for this. I think part of the
Jonathan?
Yeah.
Can you conclude in a minute, because we really we wish to have a panel discussion.
Yes, I'm almost done. Yeah. Yes, and the part of the system is that the problem why dental is still being used is simply because of the fact that the new dental filling is slightly expensive, and as a result, the people still go for the older amalgam for the dental filling. And we have also the incineration, where we have municipal incinerating waste that contain some mercury, but this is mainly from hospitals waste and not so much of the municipal. Next, please. And then we have these other metal recycling and crematoria and cemeteries. As I said, quite a number of, we found out that a large population of South Africans still use amalgam for dental filling, and during cremation, obviously this one gets, the mercury gets volatilized into the air. Yeah, in some provinces, you have high levels of these compared to other provinces in the country. Next, please. I think this is the last slide. And with this, I would like to thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And we only have 7 minutes for panel discussion. So I think I will ask one question to each panelist and ask them to respond in very, very briefly. So I think I will start with the inventory question, and I would like to ask Tom one question, which is I understand that the TSCA inventory is under TSCA, and it is there's a parallel thing in Minamata convention, which is effectiveness evaluation. So, what do you think the global community can learn from the national inventory exercise? So, this is my question to Tom.
Just a couple of things. I'll try to blend a few thoughts together. So this current inventory, the national inventory, will now serve as our United States primary source of information regarding mercury supply use and trade in the United States, including our observed trends that we've used in the past. But as I mentioned before, we've had to rely on a lot of cobbling a lot of data together. So I guess what I would say is a couple of things. Like, now that we have the authority to produce this nationwide, under the legally enforceable reporting requirements, we feel that our information will be much more thorough, robust, and coming directly from actual reporters who are subject to the rule themselves. I guess, I don't want to say I guess a lesson learned would be like, try to develop national legislation that would allow a country to do this, but it took us so long to get to this place. I guess part of the process was, even though we had a national, like I said, legally enforceable reporting requirements, for a number of reasons, we didn't want to just jettison existing agency collection systems that had been up and running. They weren't necessarily perfectly on point for what we want to do. And there's also, we've relied a long time on a state administered collection program, it's kind of difficult to describe. It's only a handful of US states, but their mercury data applies to the entire country. So we went to a great lengths to look long and hard at the authority that we were given, but also to think very creatively how to leverage existing resources, don't get rid of stuff that isn't broken, or make sure that you can reuse what you can, but also to work together with those partners and say, no one here is looking to overstep our bounds, but we want to present ourselves as almost like the missing piece, the jigsaw puzzle piece that fits within all these other reporting systems, but pulling it together to have one unified system that will be provide the best data possible, not only for the country, but also for the Minamata Convention. And just one last thing, maybe everyone knows this, even with the amount of notification through federal tools like our US Federal Register, and we had webinars, and we had all sorts of outreach activities. We actually created a user guide that helped people report, was designed to help people report to the database. Just as we all learn and everything, as much outreach as early and often as possible, because right now we are still conducting some back and forth with companies that somehow didn't know that they were supposed to report and things like that. So I hope that's helpful. Just, try to make use of what you can, and then make sure that you get the message out as early and often as possible.
Thank you, Tom. And then I would like to turn to Barbara. We learned that the illicit trade is quite a challenge, and I think you already pointed out that it's very, very difficult to come up with a good data, the real information. But do you have any advice on how to address this the information collection on illicit trade in the effectiveness evaluation or the implementation of the convention? Barbara.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, of course, because the trade is informal, it is very difficult to get proper information on it. And I think there are a few things that we can try to make it a bit clearer and to understand the whole picture a bit better. So I would first recommend to facilitate information on the formal trade, of course, to really have clearer data on both also the ASGM sector in general, but also mercury trade formally, so that we can actually just paint a better picture of the realities that are out there on the ground. And I think what might be helpful is if we remember the example from East Africa, for example, that so much mercury that gets formally imported then gets diverted. I think it would be really useful to really look in detail on the formal imports and under which uses they are, and if they are realistic or not. So if we have huge imports on, for example, industrial usages, but there is no real possibilities that these can be actually used for this purpose, then it is quite, it can very well be that a lot of that mercury then is further diverted in these countries. So I think that this would be very useful to look and really in detail into the formal trade, to then see what implications that might have for the informal trade. And I think, of course, increasing tracking systems for mercury that once it enters the countries to see where it actually ends up is really important, as well as really training the government officials to recognize mercury. A lot of the times they are actually not even aware what to look for, what to do with confiscated mercury, to have proper storage places available for them, because we also heard that even if mercury is getting seized, oftentimes there are not yet the facilities in place that can be used. So it gets stored really in just normal storage areas, which are actually really bad for the health of the people there, but also there are not proper monitoring schemes in place yet to make sure it does not re-enter the market. So I think, these are the two things to further understand the formal trade, but then also to try and make the informal trade as difficult as possible, of course. But yeah, it's a similar problem that we have with, trade for other illegal goods or drug trade. It's very difficult to tackle it. So I think we need to just go from all the sides that we can and try to make it as difficult as possible for the people involved.
Thank you, Barbara. And one note about the confiscated mercury is that the next week's session we may be able to touch upon that aspect as a part of the implementation review and review and support stream. So then I'd like to turn to Peter, whether he has any wonderful advice as a real expert in the discerning the trade supply and demand. in the middle of all these uncertainties and challenges, Peter?
Yes, thank you, Eisaku. I would say that most important for probably you and the rest of us who are dealing with these issues would be to have some better feedback about how the different countries and regions are using the supply, trade, and demand information that we're producing already. So, for example, some feedback to the 2017 report. How is the report used? What are the most useful parts? What clarifications are needed? What elements are missing that we might be interested to add? And perhaps as part of your series of outreach to regional and other representatives, there could be some discussion about what people need really to improve their understanding of supply, trade, and demand. I think that would, from the standpoint of putting together a research report like this, I think that would be very valuable.
Thank you, Peter, for a very good suggestion. And if any of the member of the audience has any good suggestion or any views looking at the 2017 report, I think we'd appreciate any input, either by email or in the chat or in the Q&A box or whatever. We'll continue this discussion in the next sessions. So we are 3 minutes past the planned finishing time. So I'm very sorry that I didn't have time to turn to Jonathan, but I think I would like to turn to another representative of South Africa. No, not representative, but the Joylina, the ICMGP co-chair, about what you thought on from this session and any message. Joy, can I turn to you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Eisaku, and thank you to you and to UNEP for having arranged this first session in the Minamata online season 1. And I think this was really an excellent session just to see the inventories and to see also the trade flows across the world. And it's really given us a very good perspective in terms of what is happening to mercury globally. And this is, as you've mentioned earlier, when someone asked what is the reason for the sessions. And it's really great to see mercury science and the Minamata Convention linking. I think last year at COP3, that was one of the things that was sorely needed. There was a panel on mercury science, and I think, and this is excellent, this is a good direction that UNEP is taking to basically link the Minamata Convention to mercury science. And I really look forward to the next sessions. We will be walking with you, Eisaku, you won't be alone. And also with the rest of the seasons following that, and all the way up to the Mercury 2022 conference to be held here in Cape Town. I know it's still very far off, but we really invite you and we really look forward to seeing you here in July 2022 in Cape Town. So thank you once again, Eisaku, for this is really for us stepping stones towards the conference. So excellent. Thank you. Well done, everyone.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, all the panelists. And we need to close this session, but this WebEx session, we will keep this open for 5 or 10 minutes so that any of the audience who has any suggestion or view would like to express any views or would like to put some thoughts about the trade supply report, please stay and put something in the chat or Q&A or whatever. And I like to invite the panelists to look at the Q&A box, and if you can type in your responses, it would be great. So thank you for your participation. I'm going to close the session. Stay safe and goodbye. Thank you.